Okay, Chairman, we're good to go.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I'd like to say welcome to this virtual meeting of the Standards Committee, particularly any members of the public that happen to be watching in. My name is Councillor John Robini, and I am Chairman of this committee. I am supported this evening by Officers Robin Taylor, who is the Head of Policy and Governance and Monitoring Officer, Daniel Bainbridge, who is the Borough Solicitor and Deputy Monitoring Officer, Fiona Cameron, the Democratic Services Manager and Deputy Monitoring Officer, and our new employee, Georgina Hall, Democratic Services Officer. So thank you all for coming along tonight. Members and officers, please use the hand raise function within Zoom to indicate that you wish to speak. Please can I also ask that any questions are kept brief and to the point. If any members in the meeting lose their connection temporarily, we will pause to allow them time to rejoin the meeting. If the webcast stream fails, then we will also have to adjourn until we're able to reset the connection, and the officers will direct us on when that is. Now, on to item 1 then, the minutes of the meeting on the 21st of May, published on the website. Can I have the members to unmute the microphones and indicate agreement with these minutes, please?
Yeah. Agreed.
Agreed. Lovely. Thank you very much.
Agreed.
In that case, moving on to item 2, apologies. Fiona.
Thank you, Chairman. I've had apologies from Tom Hughes and Stephen Reynolds, the 2 co-opted members.
Thank you. Have we any declarations?
No declarations.
Thank you. Therefore, on to item 4, questions from the public.
No questions from members of the public, and no questions from members either.
Thank you. Item 5, item 5, question from members. Therefore, item 6, which is the first one, obviously, on the agenda as we go through it. So it is the LGA Model Member Code of Conduct. And if I could ask the monitoring officer to give a verbal update on the status of local government associated development of a new model code of conduct for local government members. Over to you, please, monitoring officer.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairman. The Committee for Standards in Public Life reported in January 2019. There's been no government response to that report, despite the committee chasing it. So many of the recommendations would need primary legislation to put them into effect. One of the recommendations that didn't need legislation was for the LGA to draw up a new model code of conduct. The aim of this was to get more consistency in the standard of codes across the country, particularly with regards to the registration of non-pecuniary interests, and also clarity about when the member code applies, for example, when using social media. There's also a debate about whether the notion and terminology of respect and the need to be respectful might be replaced with civility and the need to be civil towards others, and that was included within the draft consultation code. There's a debate about whether the model code should include an explicit reference to bullying in the way that ours, for example, currently does, but not all codes across the country do. Work began on it in November 2019, and Howie Ainsker Associates were commissioned to support discussions, and discussions took place with representative groups in January 2020, and a consultation was launched March 2020 to August 2020. I and a number of officers have joined the LGA's consultation workshops, and I also know that a number of our members have joined in those as well. We are expecting some changes to the draft model code of conduct as a result of those consultation workshops, but my understanding is the LGA hopes to adopt the new model code at their AGM on the 22nd of October. Adoption of the model code will not be mandatory, and Waverley's existing member code of conduct already addresses non-pecuniary interests, bullying and disrespectful behaviour, and the use of social media. However, officers will review the final model code and compare it to Waverley's code and bring that to the next meeting of the Standards Committee for discussion. Once our own code is updated, we will also share it with town and parish councils within the Waverley area and ask them to consider revising their code in line with it, as has been our practice for some time now. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, thank you, Robin. Now, if we go on to questions then, I've got no speakers down for this, so have I any questions from the members? I can't see myself. Fiona, have we got any hands raised?
Sorry, Chairman, yes, Councillor Hyman, then Councillor Gray and Councillor Follows.
Councillor Hyman then, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know whether anybody else is suffering, but I seem to be getting interference from well, yourself and on Fiona's speech. The speech isn't very clear. Have I got a signal myself? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Right. Yes. In respect of the model model member code of conduct, I thought we had agreed that we would change our own code of conduct, which I think is very good and is pretty comparable to the new model. I think, as the monitoring officer has said, it's not as though there's any great urgency for us to improve ours greatly. There are some areas, I think the LGA version reads quite nicely. And of the Nolan principles to reflect the change that was getting on for a couple of years ago. And all I can find on our Waverley website is the March 2019 version of our code of conduct, which has the old Nolan principles in it. So, and obviously the new model one does have, the draft model one does have the new version of the Nolan principles, which I think is easier and a lot clearer to use. So can I ask, are we changing ours or have we changed ours? And the other thing I'd like to ask about is our role is to ensure the implementation of the highest standards, whichever version we're looking at, in our decision making and actions on behalf of the residents. And the difficulty that I have is that if we're going to we've got a standard system at the moment where if you've got a problem with somebody, if somebody insults you in the chamber or makes out that you're wrong about something, whatever, there is no simple system by which we can simply all agree the veracity or get to the heart of a matter and agree the veracity of any statement without going through the monitoring officer and through the full process. So there isn't really any way that we can abide quite simply with the intention and the legal requirement that we have an effective code in place, unless we actually go through the monitoring officer and make a big deal out of it. So if someone says something which simply isn't true in the chamber, and we wish to sort that out and just get them to accept that, you know, that's not the facts and apologise, and we can move on. We don't have a simple system for doing that, and I think we have to have one.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. I think we've got the point, and I'll ask Robin.
Well, the point is whether we're going to do it, not whether you're going to get the point, but whether we're actually ever going to do this and be able to agree facts and truthfulness, because that's the requirement.
That's exactly what I'm asking Robin Taylor at the moment, if he could respond.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. So on the first point, as you'll see in the recommendations, what we're recommending is that, because obviously at this point, there still could be changes to the draft code. Once the LGA have adopted it, we will know what that draft code looks like. I think that's the right time for the committee to then consider that agreed model code against our own code. If we were to do it now, then actually we may miss something important which comes up between now and the model code being agreed. So that's why we've put that in consultation with the chair and vice chair of this committee. That's why we've put that recommendation forward. In terms of the veracity of what is said in the chamber, my memory is that we've had this conversation before at the Standards Committee in terms of how anyone can prove what is being said by anybody else. That any code of conduct, ours included, expects elected members to be honest in what they say and what they do. And I'm not sure that I can say anything else much more technical than that. If people are dishonest, I'm quite sure that others, whether that be elected members, members of the public, or others, will call them out on it. So, you know, honesty is a key part of the code, but I'm not sure that there's any particular process that's needed beyond the process that we have, albeit we may revise our processes in line with the model code. So unless I'm missing the point, Chairman, I'm not sure there's anything else to say about that, but I'm happy to have further questions.
Thank you, Robin. No, I think that answered the point. Can I now ask Councillor John Gray, please? I think he was next.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is to do with passing this down to towns and parishes. At the moment, there's no need for them to have all of it included. They can choose what sort of code of conduct they want to operate themselves. And in the light of the fact that our monitoring officer also acts in that role for parishes and towns, it would seem to me to be sensible to do something more than say it's up to the towns and parishes, that we should basically say to them, unless there's a very good reason, our codes of conduct should be accepted by towns and parishes. I just wanted to put forward that and air it. I'm sure members may have problems with it or comments on it, but that's my view.
Robin, would you like to come back on that?
So the codes of the way the codes of conduct work is that they belong to each of the authorities. So town and parish councils own their own code of conduct. So as things stand at the moment, Waverley Borough Council can't and shouldn't try to force a code of conduct on or require them to have a particular code of conduct. Having said that, when you look at the town and parish codes of conduct in force in the Waverley area, nearly all of them mirror the Waverley one directly. So there's not a huge disparity there between our code of conduct, the Borough Council's code of conduct, and the town and parish ones. And most town and parishes are very happy to pick up on the changes that the Borough Council makes and adopt them for their own, albeit sometimes with slight changes and tweaks.
Thank you, Robin. I believe that answers that question. If I can then ask Councillor Paul Fellows.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly to say that obviously support this coming back and support it being taken on fully when the time comes. 2 points I would make. As much as I understand where Councillor Hyman is coming from, and I know that certain types of fact will have an objective verifiable truth that we can look at, there are always going to be some elements that are subject to interpretation and are therefore not going to be verifiable at any stage. They're going to be subject to both interpretation and political argument, frankly, which will always end up there being some things that a monitoring officer just cannot determine at any point. The other thing I just want to mention is I do hope the Code of Conduct continues to and will strengthen its reach into councillors' conduct on social media. Having been the victim on many occasions of yes, some pretty haphazard and pretty poorly executed bullying on the part of some members, it is something that we need to look at more seriously, because it's exactly the sort of very public facing thing that people see and also puts off people being standing as councillors in the first place. So very glad to see it extend to that realm.
Thank you. Now I have no other hands raised on my machine. Fiona, is anybody hands that you can see?
I've got no more hands raised, Chairman, but a couple of points if I could just add. The point Councillor Hyman raised about the definitions of the Nolan principles being updated in our code, that was agreed by Council on the 9th of June of this year. So he's obviously picked up an old version of the Code of Conduct from the website. So I'll send a link to the updated version tomorrow morning. The point that Councillor Gray raised about the principal or town and parish councils adopting the same code of conduct as their principal authority, which would be Waverley in this case, that actually was one of the recommendations of the Committee on Standards in Public Life report that needs primary legislation. So if all of the towns and parishes were willing to voluntarily adopt our code, then that would be great, but we can't force them to until the primary legislation has been changed. And as Robin said, the government haven't responded to the report at all. So legislation changes are probably a long way down the line. And then on the point that Councillor Follows raised about social media, some councils, in addition to their code of conduct, have a protocol, councillors' protocol on using social media, and there's there are some examples of those around. That if that was something that the committee wanted to look at at another time, we could perhaps have an informal offline session and look at some examples of those, so that the committee can see whether that's something that they want to pursue and take further.
Thank you for that, Fiona. You've certainly cleared up some points there. If we can go on then, unless there's any more questions, I can't see any. We'll go on to the recommendation, which is that the committee notes the update and agrees next steps. Can we unmute and agree that, please?
Agreed.
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 Agreed. Agreed.
Thank you very much, Fiona. I think that's noted. So if we now go on to item 7, which is the review of virtual meeting arrangements. Now, on 9th of June 2020, the Council adopted virtual meeting procedure rules in line with the regulations for remote attendance at meetings, which came into effect on the 4th of April 2020. At its meeting on the 21st of May 2020, the Standards Committee agreed to review the experience of holding virtual committee meetings with remote attendance by members and officers, and to make recommendation on changes to virtual meeting procedure rules, if necessary, in the light of experience. The Standards Committee also agreed to review the temporary arrangements for the planning committees, introduced to simplify the committee arrangements whilst holding virtual meetings. So now is our chance to comment on what's been going on, whether we think it's right, and of course to look at the planning. Now I know I have one speaker on this. Have we any more speakers, Fiona, or is it just Councillor Beaman?
Just Councillor Beaman, who's registered to speak on this item.
So Councillor Beaman, would you like to speak now?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. As I'm sure you're all aware, I'm chair of the current temporary Western Area Planning Committee that considers and determines all planning applications in the geographical area covered by the old Southern and Western Planning Committee areas, as well as those larger applications in those areas that were considered and determined by the Joint Planning Committee. Now, we've had our moments, certainly, I would not understate it, but generally the new system has worked, although we've had a few glitches and there have been some internet connectional problems. But in the longer term, I believe that this has proved that the replacement of the previous 5-committee structure with 2 committees should be sustained. Whether a 2-committee structure should be geographically based, east and west, is, however, open to some debate. I say this because there is a mixture of experience in the 2 committees, and in the Western Committee, then there are occasions when perhaps decisions have been made, perhaps more on emotion, and then seek planning reasons to justify those decisions, rather than on pure planning reasons alone. I'm not saying there's been wrong decisions necessarily. In fact, we've had one decision today which has upheld one of those decisions. In order to achieve greater consistency when making planning decisions, it could be argued that having 2 committees, A and B, considers and determines planning applications across the entire borough offers a better solution. Such a one borough approach would require all councillors to be aware of circumstances across the entire borough and could lose valuable local input when making planning decisions. It has to be remembered that Waverley is unlike those authorities in which only have one planning committee, such as Guildford, in that it is made up of 4 separate towns with surrounding villages and characteristics varying across the borough. It should also be remembered that in order to be politically proportionate, any 2 non-geographical planning committees would have to be significantly larger than the present East and West geographical area planning committees, as it's 22 rather than 15 members. The structure of any 2 planning committee the structure of any 2 planning committees beyond May 2021 requires further review, and if a non-geographical structure was to be adopted, then perhaps consideration might need to be given to a single 22-member planning committee. It also needs to be recognised that any creation of any non-geographical planning committee structure, either as a 2 or single committee, would require a reorganisation of the planning department staff, which is currently structured into 2 separate teams, East and West, conveniently. In any arrangement that is to continue after May 2021, there is also the option to allow members being free to speak their mind when planning applications are being considered in the ward they represent. The price, however, of being free to speak their mind would be that it might be seen to be wrong if they were then able to vote on such an application, since the decisions could otherwise be seen as being predetermined, which is contrary to existing planning application protocols. When this matter was considered following the peer review that was undertaken by PAS towards the end of our last administration, this was the only issue on which members' views were equally divided. Waverley is an authority in which there tends to be more planning applications than average. Some of the perceived weaknesses in the current planning department reflect the heavy workload undertaken by a small number of planning staff who are relatively young and are reliant on agency staff. Reforming planning committee structures will not in itself resolve all the problems that are experienced. In my opinion, it should also be recognised that there would need to be additional resources in the planning department itself to achieve improvement. In the current financial plan, this is, however, easier said than done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Beeman. I will now go over, obviously, for questions from the members. I do have 2 raised hands I can see, starting with Councillor Paul Follows.
Thank you, Chair. First off, can I just start by saying thank you to particularly Robin and Fiona, but all of the Democratic Services officers who have helped run these committees in this particular time period. I think that all members of the council, not just the ones on the Standards Committee, will agree, especially if they've observed meetings in other places, that our meetings here have been first rate in terms of how they're managed. And they have also been done in a way that has allowed members to engage properly with it, has dealt reasonably with some of the fears about the technology and barriers to access to the technology that existed, particularly over the end of March and April. And I think has worked substantially better than any of us could have possibly imagined that they would do with the council that we have. And I'm very proud that we are often sought out by things like the Farnham Infrastructure Board and other elements of Surrey County Council and the Royal Surrey to help run their meetings based on the way that we've done things here. So on that point, I think we've done very well. There are a few areas that I would want to touch on. One is the common misconception that crept into the rules that I just wanted to clarify, which was that if a member wasn't on camera, that they lost their voting rights under the current rules. Obviously, that was brought in deliberately because of the potential for loss of bandwidth, and as something that I do think some members may wish to challenge tonight, but I do think is a sensible and reasonable precaution considering the variation of broadband access throughout the borough. We've got to maintain that rule in place. In terms of planning committees, notwithstanding Councillor Beeman's points regarding potential for non-geographic committees, which I'll just touch on briefly in a second, I would like to say I completely support the notion that I think we have now, I hope, put the idea of having 5 planning committees to bed in perpetuity, not just for COVID, but forever. It has absorbed an immense amount of officers' time, and I hope that we have proven it can be done quite comfortably with 2 going forward. How we then run those going forward is a different matter. And so I'm going to end for now with a question to officers. I would like to support recommendation 2, but I would not like to do so in any way prevented a separate motion or recommendation at another point that did try to change the nature of the planning committees. I assume it wouldn't prejudice that supporting this particular recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Follows. I've now got Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Follows must have been on different meetings from the ones that I've attended, because almost all the ones I've attended have either had IT or presentation problems, where the whole thing has stopped for about 5 or 10 minutes while these technical issues have been sorted out. So in that respect, I don't think it's nearly as excellent as he seemed to suggest. As far as the actual management of the committees is concerned, yes, I think that's worked pretty well. I think that we should eventually return to the situation we had before, because that was definitely the favour of our members. And as your Councillor Follows is aware, that the council is there to look after the members of our community, and not just there to sort out the convenience of some of our officers. we do effectively, in the old system, really have two planning committees. It's just that each is split between the various key areas. So in Southern, it's split, is Southern and Western are both on the same night, and therefore the officers don't have to attend two meetings. It's just that the councillors changed, and the same with Eastern and Central. The Joint Planning Committee, of course, is a different matter. And if we should want to consider the level of application which should come before the Joint Committee, I think that's a different matter. But there are already rules set up as to which type of application should go to the Joint Committee. So that was working extremely well, and presumably would have continued if COVID hadn't arisen. As far as the breakout situation is concerned, that has also been a bit of a shambles. It's not clear exactly how breakouts, if they should occur, are really valid or managed. Certainly in the rules it says that all members of the committee should actually be present and all members of the public should hear those debates. That doesn't mean that people can disappear off into a little huddle and come back with some solutions to particular issues. So I'm not sure that breakouts are actually valid at all. If the individuals concerned want to vote at the end of that particular item. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Can I just ask members, if you're asking questions, please? It is for the virtual process tonight we're talking about. So can we refrain from looking ahead too much? Because obviously that will be another large debate at a later date. Councillor Knowles, you are next.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, on the general rules and working of the virtual meetings, I do think as they're now going on at first, perhaps there could be some laxness that the rules do need to be applied. Otherwise, some of these meetings last about 3 times as long as they would in real life, were in the council chamber. And the constant coming back, or members, I saw a meeting the other evening where a member who wasn't a member of that committee, so has only the right to put the name down and speak once when called, said he reserved the right. Well, there's no right to reserve. If you put your name down and you're not a member of the committee, you speak when you're called, well, that's it. So I think we do need perhaps some training of people to understand what the position is. Otherwise, we could all be sitting in meetings until midnight. As it's been raised now, this without notice by Councillor Beeman, of changing to committees A and B or going to one. Well, in 2007, we went away from A and B because it was so unpopular with the people who matter, the residents of Waverley, because decisions were being made, Chairman, in our town by councillors without a single person from the town on the committee. Very unpopular, and that's why we went to area committees. This is not a small borough. This is a number of spread communities. And to be honest, I see no reason why it shouldn't have go back to the 4 committees from now. Because one committee that I put my name down to speak on, luckily enough, it was the first item. So that only lasted an hour and a half, but I know the committee went on 4 hours because of the mix of South and East. And I think, you know, that seems quite ridiculous. If that had been split, there would have been 2 short committee meetings and no extra officer time would be used because they would only be the 2 halves. So I think we need to be very careful. We're here to represent and look after the interests of the public, not members and not our officers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knowles. Going on to Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Chairman. I would agree with other members that the virtual meeting arrangements in general terms has worked well. I see that the council agreed that it would go on till December and then we'd review it. I don't know whether we have to pass any resolution to the effect that this will continue to March 21, for example. But certainly when it comes to Eastern and Western planning committees, I share some of my colleagues' views that we've agreed Eastern and Western as a temporary measure, and it should not be regarded as a precedent that we are going to be happy after the virtual arrangements come to an end to go back or stay at 2 committees. I personally, for reasons outlined by Councillor Knowles, remember how unpopular the old system was when we had A and B. But I would also raise the question which Councillor Adams has raised, whereby we seem to have introduced since the Eastern and Western the situation that when a planning recommendation is overturned by the committee, then the chairman and vice chairman and the proposer and seconder for the alternative motion disappear into a huddle. And the rest of us sit waiting for 10 minutes, quarter of an hour or even longer to come back to find out what they've been up to. I understand, and I'm happy to be corrected, but I understand on Western, Councillor Beeman had a very unfortunate situation when he couldn't get back to chair the last bit of the meeting because he was somehow in a room which he couldn't get back to his committee on. I personally think we should stop that. The IT hasn't always worked when doing it. I am sure officers are perfectly capable of anticipating that, which they used to do when we all met in the council chamber, anticipating that the members might take a different view to them and having an alternative recommendation up their sleeve to introduce and to discuss. And I think it's important that members of the public should hear us, and we should be transparent in hearing how the alternative motion gets moulded, rather than it being decided in secret and then reporting back. So I have to say, I would like to abolish the idea of these going into committee rooms to discuss an alternative motion. But apart from that, I think it is working. And I'm looking forward to when the virtual meetings arrangements come to an end and we can go back to planning as it used to be. Thank you,
Councillor Goodrich. Thank you, Councillor Goodrich. Robin, can I just ask you for a view on whether we have to put another motion up to continue to 2021, or can we just continue at present?
Well, the recommendation is that we extend the current approach, the temporary approach to having 2 planning committee meetings through until May. That's only a recommendation. The committee can make a decision to do otherwise, or you could defer it and reconsider it again later in the year. That's your other option. Yeah, so just to answer that point, Chairman, I can answer on other points as well if you want.
Thank you. I now have Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. Just to respond to a couple of the points that have been said so far, I mean, the breakout room point, the idea of that was to effectively not have a significant debate that might impact appeals right in front of everybody in the chamber. And that was actually done in the chamber before COVID started in a number. Yes, Councillor, you can shake your head, but I was present for it. We had 2 versions of it. There was a version where councillors huddled to one side within the chamber, and there was another where members went to the mayor's parlour and did this. So this did happen on a couple of occasions, even prior to COVID. Now, what we were trying to do here was, for the reasons I suggested about protecting the council from part of the appeal process, was to actually give the chair a tool to take the committee out of that scenario and basically put it into a virtual version of what it tried a couple of times in the real world. It wasn't supposed to be the default, and it wasn't supposed to be used every time. It was supposed to be used if at the chair's discretion, if they needed to. And what I've suggested to the planning department is that rather than do this in an ad hoc way, they should draft some protocol for its use so it's done properly, and for the reasons I've just outlined. A few other elements in that vein are things that I've also asked Zach to have a look at as a member of the executive, and these include having widescreen presentations so that they're more clear, making sure that the colours on the plans are not in the text referring to a colour and in the image being black and white, for example, generally increasing the quality of the photos and the plans on the actual presentation so that we can see them better. These are all just practical things to help. I've also suggested that call-ins we should continue the protocol that we established for call-ins, but that papers, when they come to committee, should say who's called it in and why at the start, so that we can truncate the debate by the usual half an hour it takes us to establish why a member has called it in, particularly if they haven't then had the decency to come and present their reasons why to committee, as has happened twice. So those are the sorts of things that I've been suggesting in the background. On Eastern, Western, non-geographic, and whatever, I mean, I'm still obviously a relatively new councillor, only here being since 2017, but I really do object to being governed by the decisions taken in 2007 by a completely different council. And at the very least, whatever decision we come to, I just think it would be worthy and valuable to have that debate ourselves as this administration and this makeup of the council being fundamentally and totally different from the one in 2007. So at some point, I will be trying to bring such a discussion to this. At the moment, I completely support the idea of these two committees staying as they are, but would like to get the committee's support for codifying some of the minutiae that has gone on behind the scenes to make it better. And I think there seem to be things that we can all basically agree on so far. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Follows. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. I, for one, would be very pleased when we get back to having proper meetings in the chamber. I find it very, very difficult to. I think the decision making doesn't look good, and standards are not as good in the virtual world that we're in at the moment, because a lot of the time, it seems to me that members are having difficulty hearing and understanding what others are saying, and so aren't bothering to listen. I mean, this evening it sounds like the chairman's in the bath with bubbling noises going on. We've got the Peter Frampton effect of distortion, like like he used to, if you remember Peter Frampton from the 70s, with his electronic distortion of sounds. He did it really well, but it sounds horrible when it's on our meetings. When Councillor Adams was speaking, there was constant clicking and all sorts of background noises. The last speaker, I think there was it Councillor Goodrich? It sounded like there was a lorry reversing outside or something from what I could hear. It's very distracting. It does sound to me like other people simply don't bother listening to what some people see, and the rules. The only real rule that there is, which is the ability to be able to hear each other. Frankly, I don't think everybody is. And I think it's being ignored just so that we can get to the end of the meeting, because everything takes twice as long doing it virtually. I don't think the system is good, particularly for residents and particularly for the press, because if you cannot see who is speaking, and it's very difficult to keep track if you're trying to watch everybody as to who it is that's speaking. It's very difficult for them to report or to know what on earth is going on. We recognise each other's voices, but other people don't. And I don't think the system is good at all for our decision making. We certainly need support. And I don't blame our officers one little bit for not being able to, because we can't come into the offices. I often feel like I want to throw my iPad out the window. I have no problem whatsoever with my internet signal here, except my iPad doesn't want to work properly, and people tell me that it's that I'm freezing and locking up, and that it's my fault. So you know, I've no idea what I can do about that, but I certainly feel that I and others at this meeting too certainly need our systems improving if we're going to go forward with this. We don't have a choice at the moment, but I want this sort of working to end as soon as possible and get back to a decent standard of meetings which residents expect from us. As regards breakout, I thought we've been told we're not going to use it, Chairman, but I'll stop there as far as the recommendations are concerned. In recommendation 2, I don't think we have any real choice but to continue with what we're doing until March or May. We do have a difficulty with the idea that we're not making this decision until December, or are we making it now ahead of December? I think that's probably what we're being asked to do, to make our December decision early. I don't really have a problem with that. I just want a far better systems than we've got. And I do agree with Councillor Adams that I think very often our meetings appear to the public to be a farce. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. I would say that tonight in particular, I found everybody quite clear. I think I've had a couple of instances where people have disappeared, but basically it's been much better tonight. I was not aware that my voice was not coming across, and I hope most of you can hear me all right. As I say, I've not had a lot of problems. I think Robin answered the point as I asked about whether we can now recommend that May 2021 as per recommendation 2, and his answer was yes, we don't have to worry about this year. So the next question, Councillor John Gray.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just coming back to Councillor Hyman, if it helps. When someone speaks, there's a yellow border around their name, so it's quite easy to identify, or you can actually have a speaker view. So rather than a gallery, so the speaker comes up, it's just in case he hasn't experienced that. If we come on something that Councillor Follows said, he talked about hearing, being heard and being seen. I mean, our rules don't actually say you have to be seen. It says where practical to be seen. And I think Fiona basically made it clear at a previous meeting that the rules say you must hear and be able to be heard. And those are the criteria, not seen. I think it's difficult when you don't see. I mean, often I see a wonderful picture of Councillor Follows, obviously an improvement over the actual one because it's been touched up and airbrushed, when he basically goes offline. But yeah, I think generally members basically do try to stay online and see. I've put my blue background on to try and help because it helps, you know, not to confuse me with my background. I think it's something perhaps all members should consider. We mentioned 5 planning committees, and we hope we never go back to them. I would agree with Councillor Follows that there should be a current discussion, but I don't agree with him where he seems to prejudge that current decision is not to include 5 councils, 5 planning meetings. If that's what's appropriate and that's what satisfies our residents and that allows us to be transparent, then that should be one of the options. We certainly don't want to adopt Surrey County Council's approach of saying unitary, unitary or unitary, and we'll have a discussion about unitary. We talk about breakout rooms. I'm a little concerned about these breakouts. I can't actually find out where the policy was put in that through the online Zoom meetings, we could go off into a breakout room. It may be something I've missed, and I certainly would appreciate it. But I tend to agree with those people who say we lose transparency. And if there is going to be a protocol to try and limit its use, then that would be the second best thing to have. Certainly, we don't want to have a breakout for the most simplest. And lastly, my point is in Easton, and I'm sorry, Brian, you can't come to my Easton committee. It's been exceptionally good. I'm sorry that part of my ward, which is Chiddingfold, is in yours, so I don't actually, I'm not allowed to see your committee working. And officers have been extremely good, where an officer basically recommended refusal, and we have gone the other way with approval. Out comes one officer, and he has 19 conditions, which I prepared earlier. So he well and truly planned. And I think it depends on the officers, and I think they should be encouraged to be prepared. They don't really get upset when we go against them, as long as we've got good reason for it. And if we've got good reason, then I'm sure it's quite easy to give those reasons, document those reasons, and perhaps have those discussions in public so that the members of the public can see us. Thank you. That's my little comments on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. I have one more, and Councillor Paul follows.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be quick, I promise. Not prejudging any future discussion about planning committees. I'm merely saying what I will likely be arguing, which is what I've outlined. And I think actually, if I went and asked residents about 5 planning committees right now, what they turn around to me and says, Paul, aren't you mad? Aren't you supposed to be dealing with a pandemic? And you're sitting around messing about with planning committees. I think practically we should remember that we're in a pandemic and that this isn't bad, considering that the alternative is nothing. And actually, I think in the future, where this has enabled the participation of people who would be working, who would be otherwise unable to come to meetings and various other things, I suspect hybrid meetings are in our future anyway, and there will be a massive boon to the democracy of this borough. It will allow people who work to actually take part and will not restrict the sorts of membership that we have at present. So I'm well in favour of these meetings, and everything can be improved. Continual improvement should be at the root of everything we do. And if we ever sit here saying it's perfect, we're in the wrong. But I think we are tweaking around the edges of something that's worked pretty well in a pandemic, and that we should probably get those priorities in order. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Follows. I have one more hand, Councillor Gray coming back. However, before I go to him, I just said I had 3 points I wanted to bring. 2 of which have been more or less spoken about. One was a breakout, and yes, I like the idea of the officers coming to the meetings with alternative decision rules so that we know where we're going. We don't have to break out for those. Clarity, certainly I've had a problem with clarity of a lot of the plan, and hopefully this will be put right with a wide vision so that we can actually see a lot of the details on the plan. I did have problems with measurements, and particularly when you're looking at measurements between different buildings, for example. And my third point, which hasn't been mentioned yet, and this I'm afraid is a moan at members, can we please get to know the rules of substitute members so that we do it properly? I know at the recent meeting we had substitutes turning up that perhaps the officer didn't know about, and of course putting at the wrong time and the wrong person. So can we read the rules on substitution, please, and get it right? Thank you very much. And now I'll go on to Councillor John Gray.
Chairman, thank you for letting me come back. I just wanted to make one brief point, and that is that Councillor Follows isn't the only one who realises we've got a pandemic, and nobody who's asking for discussions on these topics are suggesting that we have them today. We're all aware of what our priorities are in the short term, and I think that, you know, when we get round to having this discussion, then I think we should have our mind very open about what basically our residents want. And certainly if I talk to my residents, their biggest issue is planning. Their second biggest issue is planning. Their third biggest issue is planning, and actually getting a local input onto that. And it's very important to them. I don't know whether that's the same to Godalming, but I'm sure it is. They probably get more of a share of the executive support than perhaps a small rural place like Dunsfold and Chiddingfold gets. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Now, Daniel Bainbridge is our borough solicitor, and he is asked to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just going to pick up some points that have been raised just from the legal perspective. Yes, I think it was Councillor Gray that reflected what Fiona had said previously about being able to be heard. That's the minimum expected under the remote meetings regulations. And the point was also made that when we're on YouTube, it's on gallery, it's on speaker view. So whoever's speaking, whether their video is on or off, can be seen by any viewer. So the issue that was raised about people not being able to see who is speaking actually doesn't arise, because on YouTube it's very obvious who's speaking at any one time. So it'd be me at the moment, unfortunately for people. Just a second point about appointments made about the quality of meetings to date. I'd just like to reflect that from the legal perspective, nobody has sought to challenge any of the decisions made under the remote meetings arrangements. We've had no suggestion that anyone has been unhappy with the quality of decision making or the quality of the way the meeting is run, or would give rise to an appeal or a judicial review or anything like that. So actually the quality of meetings that we've seen from that angle has been very, very good. I know the feeling about breakout rooms, so I won't try and persuade you otherwise. That's not the reason of making the point here, but just to reassure members that is a lawful thing to do in a meeting, be it a remote meeting or a physical meeting. It happens in licensing, for example, when members retire to make decisions. That's slightly different. It reflects what the magistrates do in court, but if there is a member overturned for an officer recommendation, it is logical for there to be a quiet space in which for the chairman and others with officers to take advice on the implications of that decision, and then to frame their reasoning and their conditions accordingly. I take the point about officers coming with alternatives. From the perspective of the lawyers in the room, that's not always possible, because members can throw up reasons that officers don't think about beforehand. But I just wanted to not persuade you otherwise, but just confirm that that is a lawful approach, and it's not just something that Waverley officers have introduced.
Thank you, Daniel. I see to have a new hand up, Councillor Adams. This is not for repetition, I trust. If you'd like to make your point briefly, please, Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Chairman. So my question is, so are we going to consider in our December meeting whether we in fact draw these operations to a close, rather than now in recommendation to just push them through till the 21st of May, or till May, 7th of May anyway? Are we going to review it in December with a view to closing them in March?
I haven't got anything on my notes here to say that we would review it in December. However, we could bring it back if members wish to. As you know, we're looking at March 2021 for the COVID, and for this particular way of doing it until May 2021. Robin, would you want to bring this back before then?
My recommendation, the officer's recommendation, is that you make the decision today. The recommendation is intended to be entirely pragmatic. That, when the original commitment to reviewing the situation was made, obviously all of us hoped that things might have improved significantly, although I think a number of us thought that they wouldn't have done. The reality of the situation is that the pandemic is still very much with us, and that the government advice is very clear that for 6 months we should expect to be working remotely, and the regulations continue to be in place. For me, it is simply practical and sensible to, at this point, decide to keep these arrangements in place until May. I would make the point that the Standards Committee can always recommend to Council something different if things do change. But personally, I think it would be an unnecessary delay to wait to make this decision until later.
Thank you, Robin. I think tonight the flavour has been that everybody's happy with the way it's running, with minor tweaks. Councillor Knowles, I see we're having more hands coming up now. Councillor Knowles, you don't want to take this too long, but if you have a different point.
I just wanted to say that I would want to see this run. Today, Waverley's moved up to amber. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. So let's run through to May, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Goodrich.
Yeah, I agree with that, but also I would suggest that we say something about the committee considering protocols, if you like, for this retirement going into a meeting, and that in the meantime we don't do it until we've got some rules. and therefore I would be, I suppose, adding a little to the second recommendation, that we ask officers to come up with a protocol for this retiring to consider a counter proposal. But in the meantime, we deal with the matter in open session.
Just Chairman, to clarify the
Right,
point.
Dan, you're right. Robin, yes, Robin.
Apologies for just speaking. I just want to make the point that there is no virtual procedure meeting rule that covers this, if you like, because the point's been made by a number of speakers that this is something that the council has, it's an informal approach, if you like. So absolutely this committee can make a recommendation, an observation that it's not helpful or to do something different. But I just wanted to clarify there's no need to change anything within the constitution because it doesn't rest there at the moment anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Daniel, did you want to say something? I saw you nodding just now.
No, Chairman. Thank you. No, I think I was nodding in agreement with something that was being said. So, but no, didn't speak. Thank you.
Oh, glad you agree with us. Thank you. Councillor Paul Follows has now raised his hand.
Thank you, Chair. So I just firstly want to just agree with Councillor Goodrich that we should, I think, explore the codification of that protocol. In advance of this, I did ask Zach to explore this possibility because there's a few, and effectively what I asked him to have a look at was first off, making sure that the chair had a specific standardized introduction speech so that everybody was aware of what was going on, that Democratic Services had a placeholder with an explanation of the process that they could put up during the breakout room in the main room so that the YouTube stream didn't have a gap and it was clear what was going on. And then that the entire protocol be defined. It would also not be the default. It would merely be a tool for the chair to use as a last resort if there were no other ways that they could resolve it. It's reasonably in a public session. So it's just to codify that last resort option. That's the only way I understood it to be. So if there was an additional recommendation to request formally that we codify that process, I would very much be in favour of it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Follows. Any other hands? Fiona, are there any other hands up?
There's no other hands up, Chairman. Just to say, I thought actually Zach had said that we wouldn't use the breakout rooms at all, but in terms of a protocol, I don't think that needs to be a recommendation to council. We can just agree that sort of between officers and councillors as a sort of an operational protocol. I don't see that needs to be a recommendation from this committee to council in the way that extending the arrangement of the two committees would be.
If I may, Chair, Zach said that he wouldn't, that the breakout rooms would not be used until it had come to standards for this discussion, at which point he would either cease the process completely or codify it as per request from members.
In that case, I think it just needs to be a code agreed between the members and the head of planning. It doesn't need a council decision on that.
So Fiona, have you enough information from the meeting tonight to take it back to Zach?
Yes, I think so, Chairman. And I think if you can just confirm with members that they're happy that the committee recommends to council that the arrangement with the Western and planning that's currently agreed until December be extended to May 2021, sort of in view of the current COVID pandemic situation, that it's not likely to change in the short term.
Yeah, we've got two recommendations in front of us. There's no other hands, so I'll take those two recommendations. I'd like to put them together. And then if anybody wants to say any more about the protocol, then we could take that under a third one. However, if we take the first two, numbers 1 and 2, the first of all considers the experience of virtual meetings held to date and makes comments, observations or recommendations appropriate to improve the way in which virtual committee meetings are run going forward. And in view of the latest government guidance on use of council buildings and general tightening of COVID-19 precautions until March 2021, recommends to council that the current arrangements for the Eastern and Western planning committees continue to the end of the council year on the 7th of May 2021. Now, what I'd like to know is whether we agree on those.
No.
Fiona, do you want to vote or can we just agree it?
Sorry, Councillor Hyman was wanting to come in there, I think.
Sorry, Councillor. Who was that? Sorry.
Councillor Hyman.
Councillor Hyman. Okay, but you're very late. Go on. Councillor Hyman.
Chairman, can you, thank you, Chairman. Can you please clarify what comments are going to be minuted as being put forward? If we are making comments as appropriate, observations and recommendations as appropriate, if I'm about to agree part at number 1, which I'm happy to put my hand up to, I would like to know which comments and things are going forward, who to, what have we said? What are we agreeing that we've said? Shouldn't we know
Okay,
that?
I've put the. Yeah, I heard that. Thank you, Councillor Hyman. First of all, can we just agree the recommendation 1 and 2, and then we'll discuss Fiona's recommendation that she speaks to Zach and the other officers. So first of all, can we agree items 1 and 2, please, that I read out? I think they don't contain much in the way of comment. All those in favour?
Agreed.
Sorry, Chair, are we voting or are we saying agreed with hands? Which one are we doing?
It would seem that several have voted via hands. However, Fiona, can we vote on this or do you want hands?
Fiona, you're on mute, sorry.
Sorry. I think under 1, the in terms of comments, observations, recommendations, your recommendation is that we need a protocol for the use of those breakout rooms, and that we shouldn't use them until we have that protocol agreed. So I would say that that's probably captured under the first recommendation. And then the second recommendation is with regard to the extension of the Eastern and Western committees.
So do you want us to take it separately on a vote?
Well, I mean, if you're happy with for that first recommendation to capture that element of the protocol around using breakout rooms in the planning meetings, I think that falls within that that first recommendation. So we can minute that sort of what, as a recommendation that the head of planning develop a protocol for the use of breakout rooms with democratic services, and we agree that perhaps with the chairs and vice chairs of the planning committees, if that would be suitable or that would be acceptable to the committee as comments coming forward.
Thank you, Fiona. Well, let's take them separately. And item 1, as Fiona said, hands up all those in favour of allowing that. This is just item 1, as Fiona said. I think Councillor Beaman, I can't see.
Councillor Beaman isn't a member of the committee, Chairman.
Ah, of course not. No, sorry. I do apologise. So would you like to read out the numbers, Fiona?
I can't actually see because I'm on speaker view.
I can see that every member of the committee except for Councillor Hyman is voting for that recommendation. So we just need to clarify from Councillor Hyman how he is voting.
Councillor Hyman, if you'd like to tell us how you vote, please.
Yeah, against. I wanted to come back to us. I don't want we haven't really debated this, but you know, I'm not going to make a decision on that basis. I'm against it not coming back to us to look at the protocol on breakout rooms, because I don't think that the chairman will particularly care whether it's lawful or proper what's being done there, because go by what they've done so far. Thanks.
I can only say, Councillor Hyman, that I have faith in our 2 chairmen. I would hope they would use it properly. And of course, if you've heard the...
well, history proves otherwise. History proves otherwise, Chairman, and we represent the residents.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. If I can now go to item 2, please. All those in favour, if you'd like to hold your hands up for extending this to May 2021. Robin, I think you said you could count the hands. Are we there?
That is unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So unless there are any other matters to bring forward, I'll now move on to the scheme of delegation, which is item number 8.
Chair, may I
report-
call a point of order on item 8 very briefly with your
Councillor Follows.
My point of order is just a question. The report states nebulously a number of councillors have raised questions in regards to the scheme of delegation. Can I have the identities of those councillors and confirmation that they're members of this committee?
Fiona.
I'll answer that question, Chairman.
Okay, Robin.
So some of the members who've put it forward are members of this committee and some are not. We always endeavour in officer reports to make sure that we don't refer to unnecessarily to who has put forward what. It's a legitimate recommendation or a question, if you like, that's been put forward. So certainly I'm happy to provide that information to Councillor Follows separately, but officers decided it wouldn't be necessary or appropriate to include that within the report. It's not a secret, but it just didn't seem to be particularly relevant. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Councillor Follows, does that answer your question?
It does, although I would say that the source of information is almost always relevant, but I understand where you're coming from. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you. So, as I say, it's item 8, scheme of delegation. This report responds to 2 matters raised by a number of councillors in relation to the scheme of delegation. The committee is asked to consider how it wishes to proceed to resolve these matters in a satisfactory way. I have a speaker on this, which is Councillor Merriweather. Councillor Merriweather, would you like to? I need the introduction first. Sorry, I do apologise. Robin, would you like to introduce this?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'm not going to say too much because there's quite a lot in the report and I hope it's self-explanatory. It picks up 2 matters raised by a number of councillors in relation to the scheme of delegation. The first relates to the powers granted by full council to the Section 151 officer in relation to fees and charges. The second matter relates to the question of ownership of an issue at committee level and whether there should be new limitations that apply within the scheme of delegation once a matter has been brought before a committee for whatever reason, and that is currently not the case. And the question is whether that should be the case, and if so, how. The committee are also asked to note that the audit committee are going to review their terms of reference, including any overlap with this committee and with Overview and Scrutiny Value for Money committee. And the chair and vice chair of this committee will be invited to contribute to their review. So I've included some wording within the report as a starting point for this discussion, but ultimately it is for members of this committee to debate the value or not of making any changes, and if so, what. Thank you, Chairman. I understand that Councillor Merriweather has registered to speak on this item.
Yes, he has. Councillor Merriweather.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make sure I'm unmuted. Yes, I am. And apologies to Peter Frampton if I end up sounding like him. Right. So, let's get straight to it. Matter 1. So when I saw Robin's report tonight, I did go back to the 2019 council agenda pack to confirm for myself that it had reproduced in full on page 60 the entire paragraph from the audit committee minutes relating to the delegation of car park fees, 134 words of them to be precise. So I was disappointed to read that it wasn't clear to members when they were agreeing this that the delegation included car park fees. But as Councillor Follows has pointed out, the report doesn't support this with any evidence. There's no indication as to who or how many councillors are claiming this, whether they believe that they did read the papers, which other members they think they're speaking for, or for that matter, what exactly they thought they were voting for in 2019. So in the absence of that evidence, I'm afraid I can't see any reason before you tonight that could possibly justify the removal or changes to the delegated authority that the cross-party audit committee recommended and the council went on to approve. On matter 2, This relates to a decision taken by the December 2018 executive and the proposals that are in paragraph, I think it's 414 of tonight's report. Firstly, I should, for the record, draw your attention to the differences between the actual 2018 exec decision, which is in paragraphs 49 and 410 of your report, and the version of it presented in paragraph 412 of your report, which was taken from the call-in, which omits the due legal process wording that's key to its actual meaning. Now, on the basis that out of these two versions, the 2018 exec did mean what it actually said, then the question really is whether there is actually any matter here that needs to be resolved at all. Because while the actual 2018 exec decision did stick with the scheme of delegation, there was not then, as far as I know, and there still isn't now, as far as I know, anything to prevent an executive or a committee or a full council from attaching to their decisions the kind of conditions that would retain precisely the kind of ownership that proposals in para 414 describe, if they want to do so. And it should be their decision. Now, even if the proposals weren't superfluous to the status quo, could they even be workable? So they'd require delegated authority to be abandoned for any matter involving an issue subject to upward referral. And this would be regardless of the reasons for the upward referral of the particular issue. And it would also be regardless of the nature and number of other elements not at issue in a matter and elements that would otherwise have remained delegated. So, for example, sticking with the 2018 exec decision in the report, the only issue for referral then was a term in excess of 25 years. That was only one detail in dozens and dozens of otherwise delegated elements in the matter. Now, for that and across all delegated matters at any one time, the proposals in paragraph 414 would simply suffocate the council. They would be entirely contrary to the whole meaning and purpose of delegated authority. So I'm afraid, Mr. Chairman, committee, I'm afraid tonight, I don't think you've actually got before you any evidence that the scope of the scheme of delegation needs to be limited, and certainly not in the way that proposals in paragraph 414 have proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Merriweather. So I'm now throwing it open to members. Have we any questions? I've got one hand up. Councillor Paul follows.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly say thank you to Councillor Merriweather for coming and explaining that. I think what we've seen here, and I'll attempt to paraphrase some of this so that I'm just clear. In matter one, either we're going to throw out what the audit committee said, or essentially sitting here acknowledging that some members didn't read the papers and are seeking to correct that through a standards adjustment, which I consider completely incorrect. And in matter two, effectively, we're vicariously bringing forward a matter that has been through significant process already and has been sustained by an ONS committee. Again, something to do with the previous executive, which we're generalizing as a broad theme here, even though we all know what it's from, and seeking to rectify that through standards. Of course, I also don't know why they would do that, because it would, as Mark said, suffocate the council. And the only other reasons I can think somebody would seek to do that are not things that I imagine would be in concert with the Nolan principles. So for the reasons that Councillor Merriweather has outlined, I certainly won't be voting to support matters 1 and 2, and we'll be waiting for other members to discuss item 3. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Follows. Councillor Goodrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm one of the councillors who was unhappy and raised it. I'm quite happy to say so. I think, I don't know whether we're dealing with matters 1 and then 2 and then 3, or whether we're dealing with them all together, but it looks as if we're dealing with all 3 together. So I'll speak on all 3. On the first one, I think there was confusion to a number of councillors who I accept perhaps haven't read the papers as diligently as they might. But if you look at the audit minutes of the 26th of November, and I quote, "It was proposed that the Section 151 officer be able to approve changes to fees and charges, including car park fees, to speed up the process and give more flexibility to change charges during the year to respond to market demand." Now, I have no problem personally with delegated authority for an office, for the Section 151 officer during the course of the year between budgets to tweak the charges. And if new legislation comes in and we have to fix some charges for a particular matter, to fix them. This wouldn't be car parking, but something else. But where I think it goes too far is the situation whereby at budget time, the decision to approve them is not with the executive or council. It is with the Section 151 officer. And I think there's some confusion about reviewing and approving. And one can get confused with reviewing is one thing, but approval is the actual decision about charges. And it's a political matter. Some councils decide, or administrations decide that in certain years that it's not a good thing to put up car parking charges or other charges, for example, and in other years it is more appropriate. And a large number of councillors have approached me about it and indicated they're unhappy that in the budget process, and can I remind Councillor Merriweather that when he was doing his presentations about the budget, he made it very clear that the council had power between budgets to change the car parking charges, with which I'm quite comfortable with, but rather implied that we could all look at them when it came to the annual budget process. But reviewing it doesn't give the power to council or the executive to change them. And therefore, I do think we need to be quite clear about that. And I think there was some slight misleading when you read the audit committee minutes of the 26th of November, which does contain the words to change charges during the year. Now, you can be pedantic on the English, but that implies to me that it's only between budgets, not at the budget itself. And I think we should therefore be making a recommendation to the executive and if to full council that that the Section 151 officer has delegated authority to approve minor changes to fees and charges, including car parking charges between budgets, but that the executive and council decide such charges at budget time. And I think that doesn't clog the works up for officers between budgets, but at least gives us the power to look at fees and charges annually, not just review them, but approve them. Chairman, if we're moving on to the other matter too, I am not wishing to reopen the matter concerning the executive in 2018. I'm not wishing to do that, but I think there's a feeling amongst certain of my colleagues and others that we should, if a matter is brought to a committee, it should remain with the committee, unless, of course, the committee expressly says that it should not come back to them in it for any reason. I mean, I'm quite happy to have that. I don't want to clog the works, but I think even the Chief Executive acknowledges that with hindsight, the 2018 decision could have been more express and more explicit about delegated authority going forward or not. And I think, therefore, that the option of removing the ambiguity, making it clear that once a committee is seized of a matter, it remains seized of it unless it wishes not to. But there should be a presumption that it stays with the committee until the matter is resolved. That seems to me a sensible way forward, and that's what I would be proposing that we recommend to full council. And on little 3, there's ambiguities between the power in this committee, audit and overview value for money. And I'm happy that we should take part in the review process. I understand a meeting's been set for, I think it's the 29th of October of audit, informal meeting, and I've been called to it, as I'm sure our chairman has. And, you know, we'll await events and see what happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodrich. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will also stick my hand up, and certainly I am one of those people who had concerns with the matters covered in item 1. I was at a budget planning meeting, which was very eloquently chaired by and expressed by Councillor Mark Merriweather, with the senior person from finance there, and they were talking about this flexibility, and it was very clear and confirmed on question that this was changes during the year. Now, when we say changes during the year, that presupposes that there is a budget plan put forward. And in the case of car parking charges, there wasn't a budget plan put forward, and this power was basically then used to set the prices for car parking charge. But let's not just talk car parking charges. There are hundreds of small charges around the place that do need to be reviewed from time to time for whatever purpose. And it's quite right to basically delegate that to portfolio holders, section 151 officers, etc. But this question about the budget car parking is very fundamental. We should have a budget approach. And if that budget approach is to have zero increase, then it's very difficult for a section 151 officer then to start putting all car parking charges up by 5% during the year through his delegated policy. However, if the budget strategy is to say there will be these general principles applied to the car parking, and we will be reviewing during the year occupation rates and others, and if there are some small changes on the 8-hour parking rate and the 2-hour parking rate, then I don't think that should come back to the meeting. But I do think the way that this was interpreted from the audit committee into council was not quite in the way that it was intended, or in the way that Councillor Merriweather put it across to a number of members who sat through his meeting. On the second point, I agree with Councillor Goodrich. I think there's nothing that we would want to say that would limit the executive making decisions. But I think it's very important, having had this experience, that decisions are made very clearly. And if the decision is made by executive or other committee, it should come back to that committee unless there are clear rules put in to delegate that power. And it shouldn't be a question of saying, well, okay, but they didn't say they wanted it back and we can make that decision. I'm very concerned. I think it should be a protocol that basically covers that. And I think it makes a lot of sense. It's not trying to limit this executive or any future executive. But I think it's really, as I know Councillor Follows keeps going on, it's really about transparency. and it's transparency that the executive makes the decision and then thinks it through. What happens if what we're asking the officers doesn't happen? Do we want to see it back, or do we have a plan B? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the latter point, I'm now on the audit committee, and I'm very keen and very pleased that we're now getting this issue that I brought up in 2018 on the table, and we're going to have a discussion about it. And it's the right place to have it with the chairman of this meeting and with ONS VFM. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Councillor Follows, you are next.
Thank you, Chair. Hypothetical question. I mean, one wonders whether the previous administration had a habit of reinterpreting decisions post-game, and that might be why they kept it nebulous. We tend to not like that level of ambiguity, and really want to seek to correct that. And my issue with the first point is that if we are going to open up every decision because we think that the audit committee or another committee or any committee didn't read its papers or understand what it was saying, despite the fact that it had every opportunity in its session to ask all questions and do what it needed to do and come to a sensible decision at the end, are we going to sit here and bring in any decision that we don't like because we think the committee might not have understood or read its papers? For me, that's a dangerous precedent. They've made their decision. It's gone through council in this case, so they've also made their decision. We can't just bring it back to standards when we don't like something a committee said. It's ludicrous. We'll go back to this other thing. If we were to do what you're proposing based on that specific decision, because it's a good example, let's just say as what happened, a lease was put through in its due diligence that was delegated to officers. It failed. My understanding of that decision and that process was that the granting of a lease happened if the due diligence was passed, if it was okay, and effectively it fell away if it did not. Can you give me a good reason why, if due diligence failed, it would be a good thing to come back to committee? Can you give me a good reason that would actually be reasonable within the Nolan principles why a council group would wish to do that? It's failed its due diligence, but we're going to potentially have another look at it anyway. Maybe we will overturn it. That sounds like something that a good council should do. It is the way it is in order to firstly protect councillors, secondly protect residents, and also to make good legitimate decisions. That's why this is like this, not just for efficiency's sake. So I actually think that both of these two open up very dangerous precedents. I don't want to be hauling in every committee's decision because we disagree with it. I don't think the opposition wants us to do that either. And secondly, the second one, it is just not something a good decision-making council would do. We don't want it to be nebulous. We want it to be very clear. These two things are clear as they are, and so I'll be opposing any changes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Follows. Before I go to Councillor Knowles, can Robin Taylor. Robin, you wanted a question?
Just a couple of points of detail. There's just been some comments around whether or not the committee would want to limit the executive. Just to be clear, I'm talking on matter 2, recommendation 2. Just to be clear that the debate needs to be about whether or not you wish to limit the scheme of delegation, so officers' powers under the scheme of delegation, because that's essentially what would come into effect were you to change that. So there's no question in my mind of any limits to the executive. It's about whether or not you're limiting the scheme of delegation by automatically bringing things into the executive, for example. The other thing I think just to make the point about is the committee in discussing and debating this will need to distinguish between a matter and decisions, specific decisions. I've tried in the wording to make that clear that there is a difference between a matter and decisions, and probably we're sometimes talking about decisions and meaning the matter in this case.
Thank you, Robin. If I could now come to Councillor Knowles, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just for the record, I wasn't one of those who raised the matter, but it having been raised, I have to say I agree with Councillor Goodridge and Councillor Gray. And Councillor Merriweather early on said the members hadn't read their agenda. Well, it appears that he didn't read tonight's, because the words are quite clear in this agenda on page 28 on the matter of the car parking, that it was to speed up charges during the year, not at the annual budget. and I smell a rat here. This is very nice to offload this to officers so that when an election comes along, the administration say, oh no, it wasn't us, the officers just did it. The government some years ago brought in the requirement, which Councillor Follows is very keen, to have a recorded vote on budget day to see how members had voted regarding to the charges and the budget they were putting on people, and to set the annual rate of the council tax. Of course, this moves some of that out of that sphere, and I think that is very dangerous. This is the largest charge in the council outside of the actual council tax. And for this just to be brushed away and say, right, officers, you can fix it. I'm very happy with it being during the year, but we've heard from Councillor Gray also that questions were asked and undertakings were given. So it seems there's we can't take any notice of undertakings in the future if what we've heard tonight that didn't count for anything. And also on the matter of in recommendation number 2, I agree again that we must limit what is delegated. If it has been a decision of the committee, then surely that should come back to the committee if it is changed for whatever reason. Now, this isn't going to happen very often, but I've even heard it said in the recent weeks that all the part 2 items at council that are just noted aren't decisions, they're just noted. So anyone could turn around and say, well, that isn't policy because it was only noted. It's only part 1 items that are actually policy. So we're going down a line of really starting to question why members are here, because virtually everything is becoming delegated. This is like Surrey County Council, 20-minute meeting and councillors have no input whatsoever. So I agree wholeheartedly with Councillor Goodridge and his proposal. I think a lot of this is to hide things away, and I'm very, very unhappy at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knowles. No, I don't appear to have any more hands. Fiona, can you confirm there's no other hands?
I've just got Councillor Follows.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I just wish to object to that comment from Councillor Knowles. His opposition to this motion is because people are trying to hide things and because people are trying to overturn due process. This is actually allowing a delegation to those officers who are properly qualified to make that determination, and for that determination to stand based on that decision. This just allows all sorts of things to come back to exec, which potentially has failed due diligence, and then puts that back in the hands of councillors. I don't think that's a good idea personally. So rather than trying to hide things, I think what we're trying to do is properly limit the power of the executive here. There's actually a limitation and a check and balance on the power of the executive. So this really shouldn't stand. And I do object to your comments there, Councillor Knowles.
Thank you, Councillor Follows. I now have Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting me come back. And I think it's quite important that we do sometimes come back on things that Councillor Follows says. This is quite a serious issue here. It was very clear that these were changes during the year. It wasn't intended. It wasn't the fact that people didn't read their papers. I don't know how many papers Councillor Follows reads, but I mean, I would imagine it's more than I do. But it's not always possible to take the nuances on this. And when somebody assures you in a briefing meeting that something is going to be done this way, one assumes when you read it in the papers that has continued. And I don't think that anybody can basically argue the fact it was never intended that the Section 151 officer should set the annual budget for car parking. It was the fact he should set the various fees that would come up during the year for expediency's sake. That's what we're saying on this. And it's just a clarity of wording, right? The wording that was agreed, Councillor Follows, was during the year. Yes, I did read my papers. I wasn't on the audit committee, but I read the audit committee papers and I've looked back on it. On the second point, we're not asking for anything miraculous here. We're just saying that when the executive makes a decision, it's very clear as to what happens as a consequence. You've mentioned the word fails due diligence. Well, if something fails due diligence, I would have expected officers to come back and report that to a formal meeting. A formal meeting, just a report back what's happened. There could be that the executive decision was, if it fails due diligence, then great, then there is a then. But I don't think it should be assumed that if you give officers an instruction like to do a due diligence, take it to a particular point, and then something happens in that process, that they should be allowed to then make their own mind up. And I'm sure they never did in this meeting. The error on this particular issue was it didn't come back. It wasn't formally minuted in a meeting, and you can't transparently follow this through. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting me come back.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a lot of sympathy with what Councillor Gray is saying, because on a couple of issues here, I did feel the same way at the time that the things were being done. But that said, I really don't know what is being proposed right at this time. And I wondered, is there a motion in front of us? I'm looking at page 26 at recommendations, at the bottom of page 26. And the recommendation, firstly, is that we consider whether to make any recommendations to council in respect of the fees and charges. Is there a motion here in front of me that I'm meant to be considering right now?
I think what I'm going, hang on, what I was going to say on that, was I'm just going to put the word A in there instead of any recommendation. We'll vote on whether we wish to make a recommendation to council, and then if that is passed, then we will have to have a recommendation. However,
surely we have to do it the other way round, Chairman. We'd want to know what the recommendation is before we decided to vote on whether we wanted it, wouldn't we? I'm thinking of horses and carts here.
Yeah, I will take it the other way around.
So is there a motion? Is there a motion in front of us in respect of either of these? Thank you.
What we have at the moment is one recommendation. What I'm saying is we need to split that into two so that we know what we're doing. So I would suggest that, as I said, considers whether a recommendation to council on the delegation, but we will also firstly ask whether in fact we do not want to recommend. I think that's fairly plain. I now have right, so Robin Taylor wants to come in.
Partly, Chairman, just to answer that question. So it's obviously sometimes recommendations are put to committee, which committees can simply say yes or no to. Sorry, this isn't one of those. What you've got here is a recommendation that this needs to be discussed and the committee needs to come to its decision. So paragraphs 1.1 and 1.3 in particular are there to direct members as to what you might put forward as a motion. So there's some wording in 1.1 little 2 that you could look at. And under 1.3, all of the types of options that are open to this committee have been listed. So yes, there's not a straightforward recommendation for you to say yes or no to. You're being asked to debate this matter and come forward with your decision. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Robin. I now have Councillor Goodrich.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, when I spoke on this, I did suggest a recommendation to council, and if it is helpful, I'll repeat it, which says that the section 151 officer has delegated authority to approve minor changes to fees and charges, including car parking charges between budgets, but that the executive and council decide such charges at budget time.
Have we a seconder for that? Councillor Gray, thank you. So if we take that as item 1, Councillor Follows?
Sorry, Chair, could I just ask of the monitoring officer how the first half of that sentence isn't invalidated by the second? How is there delegation of authority to set the charges if there's nothing to do with the budget? How does that actually work exactly?
If I'm understanding your question correctly, what you're asking is, can the Section 151 officer make a decision, and then the full council can make its own decision? That's what I understand from Councillor Goodridge's wording, that both the Section 151 officer and the council can make that decision. But to be honest,
May I ask whose authority would have primacy in such a situation?
Well, with the scheme of delegation, the committees always have primacy. So it's always the case that any decision can be brought back into the relevant committee or can be put back into the committee by the officer who has that delegated authority. Sorry, I tried to get a note of everything that Councillor Goodridge said, but I haven't got it in front of me. I expect Fiona has done a better job of that than me. So I'm not sure I can answer your specific question, Councillor Follows.
Fiona, are you able to answer?
Chairman, I did try and scribble it down as Councillor Goodridge was speaking, so I'll rely on him to correct me if I have got it wrong. But it was the Section 151 officer has delegated authority to approve minor changes to fees and charges, including car parking fees within the year, but council sets fees and charges at budget time.
Is that correct, Councillor Goodridge?
Nearly. I think if I repeat it, the Section 151 officer has delegated authority to approve minor changes to fees and charges, that was, as Fiona said, including car parking charges or fees, whichever you like, between budgets, comma, but that the executive and council decide such charges at budget time. Obviously for the ongoing. I mean, so to make it abundantly clear, the Section 151 officer in, say, May or June needs to change car parking fees or other charges, he can do so, and it'll be operative until we get to the budget the following February. And then we look at the budget again of all fees and charges, and the council decides for the year ahead what they should be. And then again, the Section 151 officer can tweak it during the year if there's good reason to do so without coming back to council, which is what the theme of it was, that we don't want to waste committee time in coming back and talking about, you know, should Riverside car parking fees go up up to 10p or 20p because there's a good reason to. We don't want that. We just want to decide the whole at budget time.
Thank you, Councillor Goodridge. Robin, you wanted to come in?
Only, I don't want to come in too much, only just to say I would want to know how we define minor.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. One of the points I was going to make is that adding a further ambiguity with the word minor is not exactly best practice when apparently trying to deal with an ambiguity. So I would also wish to know exactly what we meant by the word minor before we started. And I think actually what we're also doing here is we're actually trying to, well, some members are actually trying to invalidate the policy set by the executive, which actually was that we maintain a relatively flexible parking structure in order so that we can actually deal with the significant variations and variety that exists in each specific car park in Waverley. The idea was to keep it flexible so that we could make those kind of adjustments as we went, because as we've seen for the last sort of 20 years plus, making monolithic pan-Waverley parking decisions right at the beginning of the year in budget doesn't work very well. And so we wanted to try something different. So other than removing some ambiguity that I disagree with and replacing it with another that we haven't defined, it is just frankly an attempt to override policy through the Standards Committee, which is not what we're here for. So again, I don't support this recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Gray.
Thank you for letting me come back, and I'm sorry I keep following Councillor Follows on the issue. I understand what he's saying, but wouldn't it have been more transparent and honest if a budget proposition was put forward to full council that spelt out the sort of words you're talking about, saying basically there will be no increases on this year except, and then give the exceptions, effectively allowing the council to set the terms of the delegation to the Section 151 officer. He already has, in my view, a delegated responsibility for minor changes. But if you are actually going to say that the portfolio holder and the Section 151 officer is actually going to review car parks after 3 months, 4 months, or whatever it is, you're giving them a wider scope than the word minor, then put that as a resolution on the budget. Put it forward to council, get council to approve it.
Chair, may I have a right of reply to that? Because I do think it needs clarifying.
Okay, I'll have Councillor Hyman as well. So Councillor Follows, if you go ahead first on a reply.
John, sorry, Councillor Gray, I do think the difference between you and me here is I do not seek to presume that audit and council did not understand what they were voting for. Voted for both of these things. That's why they're there as they are. I'm not going to presume that they didn't understand this. I assume that is what you're proposing here, that they did not understand what they were voting for, either audit or council. I like to think that they did.
And if I could come back on...
Hang on, we can't just go ahead like this. Sorry, Councillor Hyman, you wanted to speak.
And Chairman, also Councillor Penny Marriott is indicating to speak.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yep. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. The issue to me at the time, my concern, if I remember when the budget was put through, was that the council was being asked to put through a budget that assumed that we were going to bring in an extra £100,000 or something like that of car parking income made from some minor changes, and those minor changes hadn't been put in front of us at the time. So this was last February. The changes weren't there, and so it was going to be assumed that we were going to be able to make the budget was going to be justified by actions which were going to be taken through delegated powers at some point during the financial year that would make that difference to our budget. And my concern was the legality of agreeing a budget. Now, to be entirely fair, the Conservatives did all sorts of things like that over the previous 15 years or whatever of their administrations, and I complained about that when they did it. And I don't think our administration, the way I felt, I didn't think our administration should do the same thing, but it was a relatively new administration and experienced, and I could see what was trying to be done. I just simply want things to be done properly. Now, what I've got here, I don't know whether this is just an entirely political thing where we've got, I don't want to be political at all about this. I want to simply look at the issue of what's the right thing to do. I do not want certainly in the same way as Councillor Gray is saying, I do not want to be in a situation where we are at budget time saying that we're not making any increases now, but the officers are going to go and make some increases later on in the year, which could be unpopular or whatever. We don't want to be in that situation where that sort of thing comes up. But I do absolutely agree with Councillor Follows that we've got to be very careful not to put in place a self-contradictory delegation or take away a contradictory delegation and replace it with another. I just want something straight in front of me. I'm not entirely happy with the sound of the wording that Councillor Goodridge has put forward, but I know what he's trying to do. Is there a tweak from the monitoring officer that he can undo my confusion with, please?
Okay, Councillor, we'll come back to that. Councillor Penny Marriott, I seem to have missed you somewhere, so please.
It's okay. I'll come back later. Thank you.
Okay, so Robin, you wanted to say something?
No, I don't have a tweak to the wording, Chairman. It's something that officers can take away and have another look at if you wish, but no, I don't have a tweak to the wording here and now.
Thank you. So I have Councillor Gray again. Councillor Gray, obviously you and Councillor Follows are coming back to each other. Is this something to put the argument on, or?
No, it's basically a point of clarification. I know Councillor Follows thinks that everything that people say is political. In my case, I'm a very process-driven individual. I had 3 years on the audit committee, and basically we were very careful to try and get rid of ambiguity. Now, to me, a budget is a budget. You can set a zero budget if you want, but it's a zero budget. The delegation was for minor changes. Now, okay, you get problems with designing minors, but the changes during the year. And I don't think any councillor would be very happy if one of his car parks suddenly goes up by 25% during the year with something that hasn't come through to council. So therefore, what I'm saying is that the executive, when they're putting forward the budget, whether it be this one or the next Conservative one, should go through the process of setting out what their budget is. And that's what I'm saying. It's a process issue, not a political issue, that I've got concerns about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. And Councillor Follows, you've come back again.
It is a process issue. And the process is it's been through audit who agreed it. It's then been through council who agreed it. I don't know who we are to completely undermine the process that drives those two committees. And I still don't know what minor means in the context of Councillor Goodridge's motion, which is why I'm still not voting for it.
Thank you, Councillor Follows. I see no new hands up. I will just say from my own perspective that I was obviously reading things, and to me, a lot of this is summed up in page 2614. Whilst there is an expectation that members and officers have a working relationship based on trust, and I honestly believe that there is that trust there between officers and the others. So I really do believe strongly that we should allow this delegation. Thank you. Right, in that case, there's no more hands. So we know some sort of vote. Now, we don't appear to have a proper recommendation, i.e. that Robin has said he'd like to take it away. However, before we do that, we could take a vote to see whether, in fact, we do not want to make a recommendation.
Chairman, one of the options, the text within the report set out a number of options, including leaving it as it is, removing it altogether, or revising the wording. I think officers only need to take away the question of the wording if the committee decides that what it wants is revised wording. And even then, officers only need to take it away if the committee isn't happy to vote with along with Michael Goodrich's suggested wording. So it does depend on where you get to. And at the moment, I don't know where.
Okay, so I think what we're saying now is that we will take a vote on no recommendation and leaving things as they are. Is that correct? Fiona, can you take it? Can you take that vote?
Sorry. Yes, Chairman. I think so. If the proposal that you want to take a vote on is that we leave things as they are and no changes are needed, I think if we ask members who want to vote against that, if you ask members who want to vote in favour of leaving it as it is to show their hands, perhaps Robin, if you could count the hands, please.
So I see 4 votes in favour of leaving it as it is.
So then we go the opposite, those against.
And I see 4 votes in favour of, 4 votes against. So Councillor Hyman, do I assume you are abstaining?
So we have a draw. So I assume in this situation, the chairman has the casting vote.
Yes.
So I will say that we do not put forward a recommendation. Thank you. So we now go on to the second recommendation. Now we may need to do this the same way. Robin, can I have advice, please? Are we doing this exactly the same as item 1?
There's a number of ways you could do it, Chairman, I'm afraid. So there's wording within the report you could put to the committee. You could do it in the same way, or you could pick up the suggested wording put forward by Councillor Goodridge. That is with you as chair to decide.
Yeah, my decision is the same as the first one. So if we could have a vote, please, of all those who wish not to put forward a recommendation? All those in favour?
We do have a frozen screen at the moment.
I was
from
going to say
both
there's some
councillors.
frozen screens.
Okay,
Both
put your hands,
councillors
put your
Marriott are gone.
hands down. Let's put our hands down and we'll do that again. In fairness, now we've lost Peter Marriott. We've lost Penny Marriott.
I think just give them one moment, Chairman, to come back, I think is the best thing to do.
They're coming back in now.
Oh yes, they're both back now. Okay, so in clarity, did you get the first vote, Peter? Peter Marriott?
Hi, can you hear us?
Yeah, Peter, yes, we can hear you now, and I assume therefore we'll hear Penny. Did you get the result of the first vote? Would it be in order to tell them, Robin?
No, we
I'm
didn't.
not quite sure when they left the meeting.
On the first recommendation, there were 4 votes in favour, 4 against, 1 abstention. So the chairman used his casting vote and voted for leaving things as they are, for no change. So that is the recommendation that the committee's come to.
So for their clarity, we will now vote on exactly the same on item 2. That is, that you are voting not to change. Can I have a show of hands, please? For no recommendation.
So I see 4 members voting for that recommendation, which is Councillor Abini, Councillor Follows, and both Councillors Marriott.
Thank you. Can I therefore have the opposite, please, those who wish to make a recommendation?
And I see 4 members indicating Councillor Gray, Councillor Goodridge, Councillor Adams, Councillor Knowles, and Councillor Hyman.
It's 5.
Sorry, 5. Apologies, my mistake.
Under item 2, then we need a recommendation to go through. Now, Robin, did you want to do some wordage on this?
It depends on where you feel the committee is going, Chair. As I say, there is wording within the report that you can put to the committee, or there has been wording put forward from Councillor Goodridge, which you could put to the committee, or the committee might resolve that it needs this matter to be taken back offline by officers and come back with different wording.
My own view is to come back with different wording so that we can sort it out properly. Do you need a vote on that? Robin, do we need to forward that as the motion?
Do you want to put that motion, do you want to put that to the committee and see who votes for it?
Okay, all those in favour of allowing the officer to come up with a proper recommendation wordage that we will then look at a later date. All those in favour?
So there are 5 members voting for that recommendation, Chairman.
Then that is what we'll do. Thank you very much. Robin, if you could put that forward, please, to us, as I said, at a later date, so we've got a proper recommendation to put to the council.
Will do, Chairman. Thank you.
So then on to item 3, which is the note that the audit committee will be reviewing its terms of reference and potential areas of overlap with the terms of reference of the standards committee and overview and scrutiny, and the chairman and vice chairman of the standards committee will be invited to contribute to this review. As you heard from Councillor Goodridge, that invitation has gone out. Both myself and Councillor Goodridge have been invited to it, and I think it's the 29th of October. So all those in favour of us going there to discuss the terms of reference, all those in favour, please.
That's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you very much, and that's passed. That's the end of item 8. So we go on to item 9, which is the governance review. And Councillor Paul Follows to give a verbal update on the governance review, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief, as we've had a fairly lengthy evening already. obviously after COVID, we were having fairly regular meetings. The first part of the discussion principally focusing around whether we should remain as a strong leader and cabinet model council, or whether we should be a committee modelled council. Officers took us through lots of different variations of this and how it's actually been deployed in the real world, both the strong leader model and the committee system. I found it quite interesting. I know a number of other people did as well, and it was a good education as to how some other councils run their lives. I think the general gist of it, and I'm sure Robin and Fiona can jump in if I've misrepresented people here, was that ultimately either system succeeds or fails really down to its councillors and its officers, the people really. And with the right people, you can actually make either of them work. And the general gist of the discussion was that we would keep things as they are for now, subject to further review. At that point, really, COVID has kind of put a bit of a mockers on further meetings for the time being. I've been meeting with Robin and Fiona recently to discuss how we relaunch this in the current era and whether it's something that we should be doing and using officers' time for at present. What we did do during the governance review was have a look at other items that might make sense to do that would be smaller but also productive work. And clearly there are matters such as planning nuances that make sense for us to do, structure how ONS committees work, and a number of other matters, potentially including even looking at how we might make a different version of the planning committee's work. Effectively, the debate that this administration has not yet had. So really where we are at the moment is discussions to decide whether we carry on with the governance group as is, or whether we make a request to the chair and vice chair of this committee to instead make it a formal working group of standards to take forward some of these matters and effectively continue its work in a more efficient manner considering the pandemic circumstances. So at that point, I'd like to finish, and with your permission, Chair, I'd like to ask the committee their views on that question.
I have one hand up, which is Councillor Gray. As you heard, Councillor Gray, Councillor Follows is open to questions. So Councillor Gray, if you'd like to ask a question.
Yeah, it's basically, I understand and I've heard about the governance review, but I've not seen any terms of reference or membership, and that would be quite useful. It may be that I've missed it, but I can't see it or any notes of what's happened in terms of the meeting. Coming back to the point about standards, I mean, governance is very clearly in the reference of the Audit Committee. The Standards Committee has a mandate over all changes of the Constitution. But the general body who reviews governance issues is in fact the Audit Committee, until we decide to change the terms of reference, that is. But certainly I would very much welcome Councillor Follows coming in and giving his views to the Audit Committee and the sorts of things that may or may not be on the table for the future so that they can have some input into that. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. At this moment, I've got nobody else putting their hand up.
If I may respond to Councillor Gray. So there are terms of reference and full details of the work of the committee up to now, and I believe it's available on ModGov, but certainly Fiona, if you're happy to make that available to Councillor Gray, as I'm absolutely aware he enjoys reading as much as me, there are rather a lot of documents to read. And it was a fully cross-party group with members of all of the parties of the Borough Council represented, including the opposition, just to be absolutely clear of that. I would welcome the opportunity to discuss this with the Audit Committee, as this is one of the areas where an interpretation of governance roles is clearly some part of the discussion we need to have, because at the end of the day, the governance aspects seem to be with audit, but actually making changes to the Constitution itself and being with standards, and there is clearly some overlap there that needs to be resolved as part of this process. So we'd very much welcome that invitation from the Chair of Audit if it's coming as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I did have Councillor Adams put his hand up during your talk. Councillor Adams.
Yes, just a second, Councillor Gray, and I'd be interested to see the papers as well, if that's possible, if they could be forwarded to me too.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Councillor Hyman, your hand's gone up.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Yes, I was attended the governance review meetings. There were two or three of them, and I was expecting far more. I know the original intention was to look at a committee-based system rather than a strong leader executive-based system, and I can understand that the lack of appetite to take those forward in the current circumstances, with more important things to look at and do. But I do think that we need to tidy up the overlap, which has already been talked about a bit between value for money, audit and standards. I just think that if we're talking about that, then I would have thought all of the members of audit and all of the members of standards should be there. I don't know. I haven't heard anything about it. I'm just wondering, is this being...
Hyman.
Okay.
Yep. Councillor Goodridge, I believe you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, if the governance review was going back to the committee system or the how we have it now, Councillor Follows might be interested to know I've operated under this council under the committee system as well as the current system, and I thought it was an improvement to go onto the system as we are now, rather than going back. I know certain views are that, you know, I like to go back to everything as it used to be, but I don't on everything. I would like to see the papers, and I think there is some merit in both the committees jointly going through this, because if there are some changes to be made to governance and that involves the Constitution, I think at least the chairman and vice chairman of the Standards Committee should be aware of the background of what's being proposed. And it doesn't seem, it seems, bearing in mind Councillor Peter Marriott is on both, Councillor Gray is on both, it only means one or two extras anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodridge. I've no more hands. So in many respects, hang on, Councillor Gray seems to want to come back again. I haven't seen his hand electronically, but he's waving at me. Councillor Gray.
Yeah, it is. I did have it. Yes, it's gone down again. Sorry, just very quickly. I have checked.
Oh, you've got on mute, Councillor
You're
Gray.
muted. You're muted, Councillor Gray.
Oh, that's probably an improvement for some. I've looked on ModGov. I can't find it, and it's quite important. So if Fiona can let me know if it is and where I can find that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. I can't see more electronic hands, so unless anybody waves at me like Councillor Gray did in a very friendly manner, I will now call this meeting to an end, and thank you all very much for a somewhat heated debate at times. Thank you. Good night all.
Thank you, Chair. Good night.
Thank you, Chairman.